Moving on now, the US, UK and Canada have decided to send troops to Kabul to evacuate embassy staff members. The United States is set to dramatically scale down its embassy in Kabul. 3,000 troops have been sent temporarily to aid the evacuation of staff. This comes as the Taliban continues to make rapid territorial gains in the region. The United States had hoped that diplomacy would halt the Taliban's advances. However, according to the US intelligence assessments, the terror outfit could isolate Kabul within 30 days and take over in 90 days.
This is not abandonment. This is not an evacuation. This is not the wholesale withdrawal. What this is a reduction in the size of our civilian footprint. This is a drawdown of civilian Americans who will, in many cases, be able to perform their important functions elsewhere, whether that's in the United States or elsewhere in the region. So the message shouldn't be, the implications of this shouldn't be outsized.
The first movement will consist of 3 infantry battalions that are currently in the Central Command area of responsibility. They will move to Hamid Karzai International Airport in Kabul within the next 24 to 48 hours. 2 of those battalions are United States Marines, and 1 is a U.S. Army battalion.
And for more on this, investigative journalist and former RAF pilot Michael Kay is joining us live from Greece. He has been a part of 2 military tours in Afghanistan. In 2004, he led an assessment on the Afghan National Army and was also a strategic military planner in the Helmand province for British troops in 2004 and 2005. Welcome to the broadcast, Michael. Thank you so much for joining us. The Taliban have captured the 14th provincial capital, Lashkar-Gah, that is the capital of Helmand. You would know that, of course. They have been making rapid territorial gains, and there is only Kabul now and other small pockets which are still under the Afghan government. How do you assess this situation?
Capitulation is the word that I'd use, but as a strategic military planner, a former strategic military planner, there has to be serious questions asked about the rapid capitulation across now the 14th provincial capital that has fallen to the Taliban in such a short space of time. When you look at the numbers, the Afghan National Army, which I led an assessment on in 2004, is 180,000 strong, and it's been going for 10 years now. So there's been a lot of training, a lot of mentoring, and a lot of operational experience that the Afghan National Army should have had with specialist forces such as the Afghan National Commandos, counter-narcotics forces. I've had colleagues who have been training the counter-narcotics and counter-terrorism forces for a good many years now. When you overlay on top of the Afghan National Army strength, coalition force numbers, co-joined with the most powerful air forces in the world, namely the US and the UK, and the French, you've got to ask yourself how the Taliban have been able to make these advances so quickly. So you have to look outside of the military bubble, and you then have to start looking at the political and the economic lines of development. And there was one thing that certainly hit home when we were there planning in 2004, and that was the component of corruption, which is very closely aligned to the narcotics line of development. And now the narcotics line of development is absolutely critical in all of this because it influences the political, it influences the economic, and it influences the security lines of development. So what's really, really important about the Taliban taking Lashkar-Gah, which is the provincial capital of Helmand provinces, is that you have the river that runs through Helmand province, which creates very fertile land. And with the fertile land comes an ability to grow opium. Opium has been used by the Taliban for decades to bankroll them in terms of provision of heroin and getting the finances to pay for weapons. So what's happened in Lashkar-Gah is a huge, huge win for the Taliban. If, and this is an important if they can hold all 14 provincial capitals. And that, I think, is going to be another question.
Right. That being said, Michael, the Taliban began their offensive in May just as US troops started to withdraw. How do you see the situation unfolding? Do you think there's still a chance, like you mentioned, if they can hold the 14 provincial capitals, do you think there's still a chance that the Afghan government will be able to overturn the gains that have been made by the Taliban? What do you think there should be a plan of action in place now?
I think the nub of the question is there needs to be some intelligence that looks at the force strength of the Taliban at the moment. We're hearing reports, and we're seeing reports on the ground and social media clips of Taliban running into provincial capitals. There was one this morning that I watched on from Kandahar. The question, though, is how thinly spread are the Taliban? What are their ammunition supplies? Where are they getting the logistics from? Where are they getting their weapons from? You can't sustain any real war, Clausewitz said this, without a solid and secure logistical supply chain. So I would certainly ask the question, when it comes to looking at warfare, you need an attacking force 3 times the size of a defending force in order to have any form of successful outcome. So when you look at the figures, as I mentioned earlier on, 180,000 Afghan National Army, technically, according to centuries of warfare analysis, you would need a fighting force 3 times the size of 180,000. That's just the Afghan National Army, in order to get anywhere near the success that the Taliban are gaining at the moment. So, again, the big question would be from the intelligence side is that how thinly are they spread? Who does the Taliban comprise? And then if we are engaging in political talks, which I think that is the only outcome at the moment, we're certainly not coming from a place of strength. But how is that component of the Taliban, the military side that we see, how is that related to the political arm? Because in the last 48 hours, talks have just ceased in Doha between US, China, Chinese, UK officials with representatives from the Taliban. And I think the other questions we need to be asking is that what political influence do the people in the representatives in Doha have over the military components, and who are the military components of the Taliban?
Right, I was just going to come to that. I will come back to that in a minute, though. But the United States, UK and Canada have now decided to send their troops in Kabul to evacuate the embassy staff members. And just this week, Indian nationals were also evacuated. How do you think, what are the practical implications of this?
So in military parlance, what we call that is a non-combatant evacuation operation, or a NEO. It's the type of thing that you saw in Ho Chi Minh City or Saigon in 1975. I was part of the Joint Force Headquarters in the UK, and one of our jobs was to ramp up civil contingency plans and joint contingency plans, of which non-combatant evacuations were part of those. And basically, the bottom line is to evacuate all entitled personnel out of the location that has or that is risk on. And this is exactly what we're seeing in Kabul at the moment. Now, that's what I see. I see that there is a force protection force of 3,000 troops being sent there to secure the evacuation of those individuals. But there's a lot of talk, Haim, about the security of the airport in Kabul. There's a lot of one of the key components of that is even if coalition forces do hang on to the airport, which is obviously a strategic military asset and strategic political asset, you've then got to look at the lines of communication from the airport into the strategic locations that will be evacuated from, such as the embassies or the command centers. And the Taliban will be all over those lines of communication. I've had colleagues that were in convoys of part of force protection duties that were hit in ambushes, and some of them suffer severely from PTSD now. So it's not just about securing the airport itself. It's about securing the lines of communication that go to those strategic places, and that's going to be a nightmare for the coalition, and that's why it needs much more than 3,000 troops. So many questions.
Speaking of contingency plans, and like you mentioned, the numbers of the Afghan military, and you have been a strategic military plan, I want to ask you, what do you think should be the next immediate steps, given the situation and the numbers right now?
Well, I think the assessments need to be made across the political and the security lines of development, and then where those assessments lie is then what the contingency plans should now be, because 14 provincial capitals in 1 month is, I'm not sure that's an assessment that even the Pentagon provincial the contingency planners would have made. So I go back to where are we on the political evolution of talks? How are the political representation of the Taliban related to the military component? If you go to Northern Ireland, for example, Sinn Féin is a political party, and then you've got the IRA, which is the political the military arm. Who does that comprise? So where are the Taliban getting their numbers from? What are the actual real numbers? Where are their vulnerabilities? And then basically you just start bolstering security around what the strategic assets are and start identifying where the vulnerabilities are of the Taliban. Because unless you turn this around militarily, you will have very little leverage on the political side to negotiate any form of power sharing agreement. So I think it's not a silver bullet. There is no one particular solution to this, but it's about identifying the relationships across the political and the military, and then sort of seeing where we used to call it center of gravity analysis. So you're trying to identify what's the thing that you have to target in order to weaken the enemy, and it doesn't have to be a military installation. It can be an ideology, for example. So that's the type of analysis that needs to go on that identifies what the critical vulnerabilities are.